Investigators say Belcastro was found twisted in the fetal position and naked from the waist down, and her blood discovered in several rooms throughout the house.
We're scared now, and that's not how it's supposed to be in a little town.
The alleged act was brutal and vicious, and the victim dragged throughout her home.
I'm seeing splatter on the wall and Mom's purse dumped. So I go into the first bedroom and there she was on the floor. And I knelt down and I put my hand on her head and I put my hand on her back, and her back was still wet. It was wet with blood.
Before we get started, go ahead and drop a comment. What's the weather like where you are right now, and what city are you watching from? It honestly helps the channel grow so much and really motivates me to make even more content for you guys. So, in today's case, we're in Niles, Ohio. One of the people who had called this place home for many years was 94-year-old Marie Belcastro. Marie, who her great-grandkids lovingly called Gigi, was an incredible woman. She had lived on her own in her house on Cherry Avenue for decades, and she'd been living alone ever since her husband passed away. She loved spending time with her family more than anything, going to church, and cooking. She had so much energy and such an amazing sense of humor. And her grandson Brian said,
"Everyone who met her just instantly fell in love with her. She was quick with a joke and even quicker to laugh. I really thought she was going to live to be 100 years old."
Even in her 90s, she developed this huge love for fly fishing, something her daughter actually wrote about in an article for Orvis News. She was really popular with the neighbors and would even hire one of the local teenagers to mow her lawn and help out with little jobs around the house. Marie was well known in the community and, truly loved by everyone around her. That morning, Deborah, one of Marie's daughters, drove her to the bank and then brought her back home. They talked on the phone a few times, and then at 5:25, Deborah headed over to pick her up so they could go grocery shopping together. But the moment she arrived, she could tell something was wrong. The door to the house at 5:09 looked like it had been forced open. Carefully, she stepped inside and saw a bottle of alcohol on the landing and another one on the stair. There was blood literally everywhere, and her mother's purse had been dumped out. But where was her mom? She checked the basement, but no one was there. Then Deborah ran down the street to an ambulance that was parked nearby and told them what had happened. They said they were going to contact the police right away. After that, Deborah went back into the house to check one more time, and that's when, in her childhood bedroom, she found her mother. Marie was lying on the floor, curled up in a fetal position, naked from the waist down. Deborah walked over and placed her hand on her back. It was soaked in blood. 94-year-old Marie was only 4 feet 8 inches tall and weighed just 85 pounds. That's when Deborah called 911. While this tragedy was unfolding inside the house on Cherry Avenue, something else was happening just one street over. Police were called about a teenager who had come home covered in blood. Jacob LaRosa had been released from the Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center that morning at 11 o'clock. When his mother saw how much blood was on him, she thought maybe he'd gotten into a fight and called 911. When officers arrived, Jacob looked like he was under the influence of alcohol and was almost completely naked. He was only wearing socks and underwear. Even though he was covered in blood, there were no visible injuries on him. He kept repeating, "They're going to kill me for this." An ambulance arrived to take him to the hospital. As they were loading him into the ambulance, an officer was told to immediately head to the house across the street, 509 Cherry Avenue. There was blood all over the home and a dead woman inside. Everything happened so fast. The crime scene was quickly secured, and Jacob was taken to the hospital. He was only 15 years old. The thought that he could be involved was extremely disturbing. At the hospital, Jacob was still speaking incoherently and seemed disoriented. Officers were instructed to detain him as a suspect in Marie's death, and he was handcuffed to the bed. Medical staff removed his socks and underwear to examine him and provide care, then wiped him down with a wet cloth. Another officer obtained a search warrant for his body, and under that warrant, they collected scrapings from underneath his fingernails.
Investigators say Belcastro was found twisted in the fetal position and naked from the waist down, and her blood discovered in several rooms throughout the house.
The evidence showed that Marie had been struck in the head over and over again with a heavy object inside the house. Investigators found a flashlight, and they believed that was the weapon used in the attack. After that, she was dragged into the bedroom where there was an attempted sexual assault. She had massive, horrifying head injuries, and experts couldn't even determine how many times she had been hit. A Niles police detective, Craig Aurelio, said,
"This was one of the most horrifying scenes I had ever seen in my 24 years in law enforcement."
For her family, this was absolutely devastating. Her grandson Brian said she was small, but she was tough, and she had a heart full of love. Her great-granddaughter Angelina added, "I honestly think she was one of the sweetest people who ever lived in Niles." It feels like everyone loved her and was a huge fan of hers. She was like an angel on earth. And later it came out that one of the people she had helped and shown kindness to was actually Jacob LaRosa, the same teenager she paid to mow her lawn and do little jobs around the house.
She was a nice woman. I mean, she'd give anything to anybody.
Cherry Avenue in Niles is a much different place today than it was before 94-year-old Marie Belcastro was murdered and her neighbor, 15-year-old Jacob LaRosa, was implicated in brutally beating her inside her home.
You got to be very more careful.
Asa Cox says while Belcastro had a security system sign in her front yard, she tells us she never had it installed.
I would talk to her, wave at her and everything. She was just a nice person, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I wish she would have got that system put in.
At Belcastro's house, police tape is back up and a growing memorial sits outside. Kelly Jo Porter, who lives across the street, came out to light candles on this Good Friday. She tells me she used to keep her doors unlocked. But after this,
We're not going to do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're scared now, and that's not how it's supposed to be in a little town.
This murder has also caught the eye of the Area Agency on Aging.
It's a wake-up call for other people to be a little bit more alert.
Lisa Solly says seniors tend to be more trusting, especially with people they know.
Because you've seen them grow up, you've talked to them, or they've talked to you. But even then, you can ask for references or who else have you worked for, and then call those people to find out, what kind of work this person did or just a little bit more about them.
But who was Jacob LaRosa? Really? This wasn't even close to his first run-in with the law, not his second, not his third either. Not at all. From early childhood, his life was filled with warning signs, constant trouble, and ongoing involvement with social services and the police. Over the previous 3.5 years, he had repeatedly been in contact with the juvenile justice system. And these weren't just isolated incidents, it was a whole pattern of situations that kept getting more and more serious over time. His parents divorced when he was only 2 years old, at an age when a child is just starting to develop a sense of safety and attachment. And by the time he was 3, Jacob was already showing serious hyperactivity issues that made his behavior and relationships extremely difficult. When he was 8 years old, he began seeing counselors for mental health problems. Around that same time, one of the first really disturbing episodes happened. He started a fire in his own bedroom. This wasn't just some childish prank. It was a dangerous sign of uncontrollable impulses. By the time he was 11, he had already been hospitalized for serious mental health issues. And the very next year, while he was still just a kid, he began using drugs. As time went on, Jacob went through different treatment programs for both drug and alcohol addiction. People tried to steer him in a better direction and help him deal with his problems, but none of it ever seemed to last. His relationship with his father was tense and painful. They argued constantly and couldn't seem to get along. And when a stepfather entered his life, Jacob was only 4 at the time, things didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. That relationship was also full of conflict and tension. From first grade on, Jacob was placed in special education classes because he struggled badly with learning. He was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and had below average intelligence. At school, he was always falling behind his peers, which only pushed him further into isolation and anger. Another major issue was stealing. He stole from stores, from people he knew, and even from his own family. Every night, the doors in the house were locked, trying to keep him from taking more things. The situation became so intense that his father actually started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. That's how afraid he was of his son's aggressive and unpredictable behavior. Starting in September of 2013, Jacob's name showed up in 19 police reports. It was almost non-stop. Many of the calls were about him running away from home, disappearing for hours or even days at a time. Others involved theft, trespassing, assaults, and vandalism. In one especially violent incident, he threw a glass jar with a candle inside straight at his 7-year-old stepsister's head. The glass shattered, and the little girl suffered a 3-inch cut above her left eye. There was blood, screaming, total panic, another moment that showed just how dangerous his outbursts were becoming. On September 4th, his mother called the police at 3:30 in the morning. She said Jacob had just come home, but after another argument, he left again. The dark night, empty streets, and once again, he disappeared without any explanation. 3 days later, his father personally went to the police station. He told officers that Jacob kept running away and hanging out with a bad crowd. He also shared something terrifying that had happened the day before Jacob had been at a house on Lafayette Avenue, where an adult man forced him to take drugs while threatening to kill him. The following month, on October 9th, police were called again, this time for a shoplifter. When officers arrived, they realized it was Jacob. When 2014 rolled around, the problems didn't stop. If anything, they just kept piling up. New reports started coming in about thefts within his own family. On April 23rd, his mother once again called the police, saying Jacob was on probation because of the runaways and had failed to come home yet again. In June, 2 more reports were filed after more thefts. In July, there was another call. It felt like every single month brought new trouble and new police involvement. Neighbors also started complaining. They told officers that Jacob was throwing rocks at parked cars, damaging windows and body panels. In one officer's report, it said, "The mother has been told multiple times how to properly file complaints and how to work with the Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center, but it appears she hasn't been following those recommendations." Jacob's stepfather even asked if, at some point, the responsibility could be placed on her. I explained to him that he also shares responsibility. Since they all live together as one family, they need to contact the probation officer or the supervisor if nothing is being done. The mother constantly makes excuses for her son's behavior instead of holding him accountable. I told her the same thing. Jacob was responsible, and there was absolutely no doubt about it after everything investigators had heard and seen during the case. As they started piecing everything together, it slowly became clear how the tragedy actually unfolded. The first attack, according to detectives, happened right in the living room, a space that had once been peaceful and full of everyday comfort. That's where it all began, before she was forcibly dragged into the bedroom, where the violence continued. That path, from one room to the other, became a silent reminder of just how brutal that night truly was. What shocked everyone the most was his complete lack of remorse. Not only did he show no regret at all, but he actually acted like he was proud of what he had done. While he was being held at the juvenile detention center, he even bragged to other teens saying he wanted to hide her body and save it for later. Those words sounded so cold and emotionless, like he wasn't even talking about a person, just an object. And for many people, that was yet another sign of how dangerous he really was. Since Jacob was only 15 years old at the time of the crime, the court faced an incredibly serious decision whether he should be tried as a juvenile or as an adult. And that choice wouldn't just affect how long he'd be punished, it would shape the rest of his life. Over 4 intense days of hearings in juvenile court, Jacob's attorneys tried to convince the judge not to transfer the case to adult court, talking about his age, the possibility of rehabilitation, and the circumstances of his upbringing. Meanwhile, the prosecution carefully explained, step by step, why he needed to be tried as an adult, focusing on the brutality of the crime, his complete lack of remorse, and the serious danger he posed to society. Every word in that courtroom felt heavy, because they weren't just deciding a legal process, they were deciding the line between childhood and full responsibility for a horrific crime.
Let me give you fair warning. You best be on your very best behavior.
Judge Sandra Harwood issuing a stern warning to 16-year-old Jacob LaRosa.
I want to make something really clear to you. I don't like what I have heard in regards to your continuous infractions down in the juvenile detention center.
This reprimanding comes after she announced her decision to transfer his case to Common Pleas Court. Prosecutors requested a $3 million bond, saying he's walked away from some facilities. And in testimony during the hearing last week, he even talked about planning an escape.
We're looking forward to presenting this case to a grand jury and proceeding to prosecution in the adult court, but I could not thank Judge Harwood for her very detailed and thoughtful analysis, and really a decision that is well deserved.
The alleged act was brutal and vicious, and the victim dragged throughout her home.
Judge Sandra Harwood just ruled that Jacob LaRosa will be tried as an adult.
Covering Trumbull County, a teenager from Niles has been indicted by the Trumbull County grand jury for a murder this past March. 16-year-old Jacob LaRosa will face charges of aggravated murder and other felonies in connection with the death of his 94-year-old neighbor, Marie Belcastro. We told you last month that Trumbull County Family Court Judge Sandra Harwood ruled LaRosa could be tried as an adult for those crimes.
The Ohio Supreme Court has refused to hear an appeal from a Niles teen accused in the beating death of his elderly neighbor. That ruling came down today. Attorneys for Jacob LaRosa challenged a decision that the teen be tried as an adult. He's accused in the March 2015 murder of 94-year-old Marie Belcastro. She was killed in her home in Niles. LaRosa's trial will now move forward in adult court. It's scheduled to start on September 19th.
The prosecution was pushing for a life sentence without any chance of parole, while the defense was hoping for a different outcome, life in prison, but with the possibility of being released after 20 years.
And attorneys representing the teenager charged in connection to the crime are asking a judge to exclude some evidence at trial, including items collected from his person and his home the day of the murder and statements he made to police.
He was crying. Obviously, and he just kept saying, he said, I don't know how many times he said, they are going to kill me for this. They're going to kill me for this.
Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker told the court the state agreed to not use the statement LaRosa gave to Niles Police Lieutenant Dan Atkins at the hospital on March 31st of 2015, but would want to question him about it should he take the stand. But LaRosa's attorneys want other things said to officers suppressed too, including anything he may have said around police.
Did you interrogate him in any way?
I don't recall asking any questions pertinent to why I was there.
With reference to any other extraneous statements that the defendant gave, we believe those statements were not made a result of questioning by law enforcement and are not a violation of Miranda warnings.
Or constitutional.
Or constitutional.
Judge Wyatt McKay will rule on the motion at a later date.
In the end, that motion was denied after the court carefully reviewed all the circumstances of the case. The judge ruled that the scrapings taken from underneath Jacob's fingernails clearly fell within the scope of the search warrant and had been collected legally. According to the court, that evidence didn't violate any of Jacob's constitutional rights. As for the underwear and the socks, the court separately determined that Jacob had voluntarily sought medical treatment. At that moment, he believed he was a victim and was looking for help, not trying to protect himself from an investigation. Because of that, the court said he had no reasonable expectation of privacy when it came to the clothing that medical staff removed from him. Those items were taken off as part of medical care, not as the result of a police search. So, the Fourth Amendment didn't apply to the seizure of those items. The judge reminded everyone that the Fourth Amendment protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government, but in this situation, everything happened in a medical setting without direct involvement from law enforcement. The same reasoning applied to the wipe that had been used. It was determined that it belonged to the hospital, not to Jacob himself. And on top of that, there was no expectation of privacy when it came to an item covered in another person's blood. The court concluded that none of those circumstances were protected by the Fourth Amendment. The appeals court later agreed, ruling that since the socks and underwear were removed by a nurse for medical purposes and not by police, there was no constitutional violation. That decision clearly drew a line between medical procedures and investigative actions. And since the wipe didn't belong to Jacob, there was no violation there either. The court also pointed out one more important detail. The term hand swabs listed in the search warrant was determined to include the scrapings taken from underneath his fingernails. So all of that evidence was considered legally obtained and admissible in court. Every attempt by the defense to challenge it was rejected. Once those issues were finally resolved, the case slowly moved forward. The legal battles over the evidence were coming to an end. And it was finally time to begin selecting the jury.
Ahead, jury selection continues in the Jacob LaRosa murder trial. Attorneys are questioning each possible juror to see how much they heard or read about the case in the media. If a jury is picked today, they'll visit the crime scene in the afternoon.
If the jury had been selected that day, they would have gone out to visit the crime scene later that afternoon. But in the end, a jury was never actually chosen.
Right now at 6, a no contest plea for Jacob LaRosa in Trumbull County Court today. Now prosecutors will work to make sure he never gets out of prison.
Instead of continuing the process of selecting a jury, Jacob LaRosa entered a plea.
No contest.
These jurors were no nonsense and weren't going to mess around.
And Judge Wyatt McKay found him guilty of the charges.
We're going to prepare now for the sentencing hearing, and like I said, our goal is to get him life imprisonment without the eligibility of parole at any point in his life.
Jacob LaRosa officially entered a no contest plea, which basically means accepting the conviction without directly admitting guilt. Judge Wyatt McKay then found Jacob guilty of aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, and attempted rape. And the assistant prosecutor for Trumbull County, Chris Becker, said,
Jacob LaRosa is guilty. Honestly, he's one of the most clearly guilty defendants I've seen in my 31 years as a prosecutor. And he truly deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison for the horrific crimes he committed against Marie Belcastro.
He went on to add, Jacob basically took her life over just a few bottles of alcohol. Even so, the evidence was still presented in court. Autopsy photos were shown, and the county coroner essentially stated that her face had been crushed. During most of those images, Jacob looked away just like he did when the crime scene photos were displayed. One witness, who had been with Jacob at the Trumbull County Juvenile Justice Center, testified that earlier that day Jacob had been drinking alcohol with friends, but they ran out. So Jacob went to Marie's house to get more. The witness also said that Jacob admitted to him that he had beaten her with a flashlight.
Brutality, it's one of the worst things I've ever seen. 24 years in law enforcement.
I'm seeing splatter on the wall and mom's purse dumped. So I go into the first bedroom and there she was on the floor. And I knelt down and I put my hand on her head and I put my hand on her back and her back was still wet. It was wet with blood.
A lot of emotional testimony today inside the court for day 2 of Jacob LaRosa's sentencing hearing.
I want you to know that I am sorry.
Speaking through tears.
And I wish she was here with you.
Both LaRosa's mother and sister apologized directly to Marie Belcastro's family.
I truly hope that you guys can forgive him one day.
I live with so many regrets.
When it was his turn to address the court, LaRosa apologized and asked for a second chance.
I think about what I did and all the things I've done every day and night, and I cannot forgive myself.
As a Christian, I know very well that God asks me to forgive Jacob LaRosa. He doesn't ask me to forget.
I miss my mom every day. I trust our whole family will have justice, closure, and healing.
It's now up to the judge to decide what punishment he sees fit for the crimes.
Marie Belcastro, may she be his last victim.
In the sentencing document, prosecutors wrote it plainly. The crimes committed by this defendant were like something straight out of a slasher movie, and it was clear there was no motive other than killing and chaos for the sake of killing and chaos itself. They stressed that Jacob showed absolutely no remorse for what he had done. According to them, throughout the entire process, he never showed regret or any real understanding of the harm he caused. His behavior came across as cold and detached, which only made the courtroom even more uneasy. They went as far as to say, these are the actions of a young, developing psychopath who will undoubtedly turn into a more skilled and calculated killer if this court allows him to return to society. Those words landed hard, highlighting the danger they believed he posed to the public. The defense, however, argued the opposite. Jacob's attorneys asked the court to give him a chance to one day earn his freedom. They claim that people can change over time even after committing something this horrific. And if he didn't change, they said, then he would still end up spending the rest of his life behind bars anyway. The defense also insisted the court should take into account his home life and the difficult family situation he grew up in. They stated that Jacob had suffered physical abuse from both his father and stepfather since childhood. They gave examples of the violence they believed shaped his behavior. One of those examples was that Jacob once ate a cupcake and was brutally beaten with a belt buckle for it. According to the defense, that moment symbolized the constant fear and pain he grew up with. His attorney also added that even after Jacob was arrested for Marie's murder, his father still came to visit him in jail, and instead of offering support or remorse, he actually advised him to join a prison gang. Those words sounded like yet another reflection of the environment Jacob had been raised in. Still, the defense insisted Jacob wasn't a lost cause. They pointed out that he had expressed a desire to finish school and get an education. According to them, Jacob wanted to learn and someday become a counselor, helping others in the future. The defense tried to show that, even within the darkness of his past, there was still a possibility for change.
The now 19-year-old Jacob LaRosa is scheduled for sentencing this afternoon in Judge Wyatt McKay's courtroom.
A prison term of life without parole in a state penal institution.
Showing no remorse, the now 19-year-old Jacob LaRosa was given the maximum sentence allowed by law.
Jacob LaRosa was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole, and on top of that, he was given another 30 years for the robbery, the illegal break-in, the attempted rape, and the murder itself, bringing the case to an end after a long and exhausting court process where every horrifying detail had been laid out in front of the judge and the courtroom. Because of his age at the time of the crime, the death penalty wasn't an option, even with how incredibly brutal everything had been. The court also ruled that Jacob would be registered for life as a Tier 3 sex offender, the highest risk level there is, meaning he would be monitored permanently and officially considered a danger to society. In explaining the sentence, the judge said the court had taken into account Jacob's mental health struggles and how young he was when the crime happened, but that those factors had to be weighed against the extreme seriousness of what he had done and the clear evidence showing that if Jacob were ever released, he would likely offend again. Which is why the judge said society needed to be protected. The judge also made it clear that the sentences would not run at the same time, but instead would be served one after another, since each crime was separate and deserved its own punishment, something that significantly increased the actual amount of time Jacob would spend behind bars. When the sentence was finally read out loud, Jacob didn't react at all. His face stayed completely cold and emotionless, no tears, no regret, nothing, and for a lot of people in the courtroom, that silence was honestly more disturbing than any words could have been. The entire case had stretched on for 3 years, filled with interviews, expert testimony, endless court hearings, and painful memories for Marie's family, and seeing it finally come to an end brought at least some sense of relief. Even though the pain itself never really went away, there was just that feeling that justice had finally been served. The assistant prosecutor later said he hoped all the hundreds of hours of work that went into the investigation would mean Jacob wouldn't be able to successfully appeal the conviction, pointing to how solid the evidence was and how it had held up in court. Still, an appeal was filed with the 11th District Court of Appeals, focusing on trying to throw out some of the evidence collected at the hospital after Jacob's arrest. But the appeals court ultimately upheld the original ruling, deciding that everything had been gathered legally and properly admitted. That was another major setback for the defense, but even then, the fight wasn't over yet. The case was pushed even higher, all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, where it was set to go through yet another round of legal review, keeping the tension and uncertainty alive for everyone involved.
The argument today: did a local hospital violate his rights when a nurse turned over a washcloth used to clean up the teen? His lawyer argued hospital staff turned over clothing and a bathroom washcloth without ever obtaining a warrant.
What we do know is that this is constitutional error if there is error, and the issue isn't overwhelming evidence of guilt. It's, is there a reasonable possibility the improperly seized evidence contributed to the conviction? The question becomes whether or not the hospital had authority to turn that cloth over. And it doesn't matter if it's a vial of blood, a syringe, or a catheter with urine in it. The hospital doesn't have lawful authority to breach Mr. LaRosa's privacy rights.
Justices ruled today that did violate LaRosa's rights. They say, though, LaRosa would have been found guilty even without that evidence.
In the end, his appeal didn't go anywhere. It was denied, and the sentence stood. When Ohio Senate Bill 256 went into effect, the impact was felt almost immediately, and the consequences were massive and painful for so many families. The law retroactively eliminated life sentences without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders, basically rewriting the futures of hundreds of inmates. With the exception of those who had killed 3 or more people or were involved in acts of terrorism, it meant that many prisoners were suddenly given a chance at freedom. And one of those people was Jacob LaRosa, whose name quickly made its way back into headlines and back into the lives of the families who had already suffered so much. One of Marie's great-granddaughters, Angelina, later spoke publicly about the new law and the deep impact it could have on victims' families. She talked about the pain that had resurfaced and the fear of a future that now felt even more uncertain. During the Senate debates, then-Senator John Eklund even referred to the man who murdered her great-grandmother as one of the most promising people in our state. Those words hit like a slap in the face to everyone who had spent years living with the aftermath of the crime. And what about my potential, Angelina wrote. What about the future that was stolen from every victim and their loved ones? SB 256 reopened wounds that had only just begun to heal for hundreds of families across Ohio. What had once felt like a closed chapter suddenly became a fresh source of pain and fear all over again. Different levels of anxiety and depression came rushing back. Horrible nightmares, sleepless nights, and memories that wouldn't let people rest became far too common. My trust in people, in the government, and in the system is completely broken, she wrote. Because of SB 256, even winning a parole hearing just means starting another painful countdown to the next one. Trumbull County Prosecutor Dennis Watkins said he would do everything in his power to keep Jacob behind bars for as long as legally possible. He made it clear he had no intention of backing down. This office will continue to strongly oppose the release of Jacob LaRosa and will take every necessary step, including potential appeals if needed, to make sure Jacob LaRosa serves the maximum sentence allowed by law. He also said that Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker fully shared that position. According to Becker, the law erased years of hard work by law enforcement, crime scene investigators, prosecutors, and judges, all the people who had spent countless hours gathering evidence, fighting for justice, and securing the conviction. As it stands now, Jacob will first become eligible for parole in his early 40s, a date that has already become a frightening marker for Marie's family. Her grandson, Brian, said he plans to personally speak at the parole hearing. He wants to look the man who took his grandmother's life in the eye and remind the court of the real cost of that crime. I forgive Jacob on a spiritual level, and I hope God can use him where he is, Brian said, but I believe society needs to be protected from him, and he needs to serve his time. After a pause, he added something that carried both exhaustion and pain. And I'm still working on forgiving the Ohio lawmakers.
Marie Belcastro's grandson, Brian Kirk, says his family is relieved. An amendment included in Senate Bill 288 legislation that created stricter distracted driving laws also lengthened the time allowed between parole hearings for juvenile offenders like his grandmother's killer, Jacob LaRosa.
We're very happy about that. It's a sign that people in Columbus have heard us.
Kirk has been fighting changes made to state law under Senate Bill 256 in 2021. It retroactively gave juvenile defendants sentenced to life without parole eligibility. For LaRosa, it meant his first parole hearing would be in 2040, and if denied, every 5 years after. Under the new law, which takes effect in April, if an offender is denied parole, the parole board would set the next hearing based on rules adopted by the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction at the time of the denial.
Every 10 years feels like a step in the right direction. It feels like something that's more manageable.
Jacob LaRosa is a poster child for a juvenile murderer who does not deserve to ever be out on parole.
Both Kirk and Becker agree that the amendment is a step in the right direction, but say their battle isn't over.
It's not everything we want, but we'll just keep fighting.
Essentially, it is a small victory for those who are fighting for the victims and to keep these murderers in prison where they belong. But it doesn't go far enough. We need to go back to pre-Senate Bill 256.
For so many people, the impact of this case became something that will never truly fade from their memory. It wasn't just another crime in a long list of cases, it was a story that left a deep mark on the hearts of everyone who came into contact with it. Trumbull County Prosecutor Dennis Watkins admitted that the crime scene is burned into his mind forever, something he says can't be erased no matter how many years pass or how many other cases he goes on to see. Assistant Prosecutor Chris Becker also shared that there are certain cases that stay with you for life, and this one, he said, was one that continues to haunt even the most experienced professionals. He described it as one of the most brutal and bloodiest murders he had ever encountered in his entire career. Marie Belcastro was a woman with a quiet but incredibly strong spirit. She had a deep faith and lived her life devoted to serving others. She always opened her heart to those who needed help, support, or simply a little human warmth. Marie didn't just believe in her faith, she lived it every single day. In every act of kindness, in every word of encouragement, and in every moment of care for the people around her. And even after such an unimaginable tragedy, it's her love, not the violence, that continues to define her legacy. Because while one person's actions brought so much darkness and pain into this world, the light that Marie Belcastro shared so generously with others never went out. It continues to shine brightly in the memories of her loved ones, in the words of those who knew her, and in the story that's now being heard around the world. And we truly want to thank all of you for staying with us and watching. We'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment. Your support means so much to us and helps the channel keep growing. We honestly appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. Take care of yourselves.